The reason why I paired Dannah and Jan today was because both of them have analytical, command, and individualization all in their top 5 strengths together. When I click on the top 10, they have a whole lot more. They have analytical, responsibility, arranger, command, relator, individualization, which is just a huge amount of strengths to have, paired up in a person's top 10 strengths with 2 people. So I thought it would be really interesting to have both of them on the call today. So we'll see if Dannah can join us in a bit. But Jan, let's have you just share with everybody on the call today who you are, where you started in your career, what you thought you were going to be one day, where the trajectory that your career took, and then where you've ended up today.
Okay. Well, I was never one of those children that knew what I wanted to do and had life all mapped out. I came from a small town in Oklahoma outside of Tulsa, and all I knew was I didn't want to stay there. So I took advantage of the opportunity that my sister had moved to Chicago and gone to work for American Airlines. So I promptly moved to Chicago, got a summer job with American, and turned that into a long-term career. So for the first few years, I was at O'Hare in Chicago, and then met my future husband, and we transferred to Los Angeles. And so we did the whole airport operations kind of world for a few years. And we went from Los Angeles to Des Moines, Iowa, which was a big blow to me. It was a really hard move from LA to Iowa.
That's my stomping ground, by the way, because I was from Omaha, Nebraska, which is very close to Des Moines.
Right. Every time I would see a palm tree on the TV, I would cry for the first year. But we only stayed there a couple of years and then headed back to Chicago when he left American and started with Dun & Bradstreet Company. And so while I was working at O'Hare, I had the opportunity to move over to their, I'll call it computer division at the time, that we all know as Sabre today. So that's kind of started my Sabre career. I started as a Sabre specialist that went into travel agencies that used our systems and taught them how to use them. And then eventually we moved from there to Atlanta. And then my career kind of started to progress. That was my first move into a management position where I managed a team of people that supported agencies across the Southeast. We moved from there. They decided to close our base to Tampa, Florida, stayed down there a couple of years doing the same job. And then lo and behold, my position was being eliminated. It was kind of the first of the big company reorgs and layoffs and what have you. So, so then the big question is, what do I do now? Well, fortuitously, they decided to start up what they called a global accounts division that would manage the largest travel agencies that that Sabre had as customers. So people like American Express, Carlson Wagonlit. I think there were about 10 of them at the time. So we packed up and moved to Dallas, and have been here ever since. So my career with Sabre, I moved around, to different business divisions that they had, and had a very long career there. And then, as companies do, they came to me one year right before Thanksgiving and said, Jan, we would like you to cut $1.5 million out of your budget after you've paid severance. So that was a nice Thanksgiving Christmas gift. But as I sat down to kind of work through that process, I decided I would make a nice contribution to the bottom line, and I wrote myself a package. So I left after, I won't even tell you how many years, because it will tell you too much about how old I am, but it was a very long career. So I took a year off. We had sold our house. Had sold our house in Dallas and bought a house up near the lake, near Lake Louisville.
Mhm.
So we moved up here. I took a year off and did nothing. We rode scooters around the lake, and I just took a year to decompress, basically.
Mhm.
And then woke up one morning and said, okay, I'm ready to go back to work. And I had no designs to go back to a corporation. I've been there, done that, had enough of that. So I decided to get my real estate license. And I honestly thought when I started, it would be, kind of a part-time thing, something to spend time at, but that's not who I am. So this has turned into quite a second career, or as I call it, my Act Two. So I just finished 5 years, and it has been wildly successful. So I've sold over the last couple of years, in 21, about $10 million in real estate. In 22, almost 12 million, and we're kind of on track towards that today. So it is more than a full-time job. It's so much so that I even had my husband go get his license, because I can't be in two places at one time. So he really doesn't sell, but I can pick up the phone and call him and say, I need you to run out and show this house.
Yeah.
Or I need you to go to this closing for me, or things like that. So and I found it was just a really easy transition for me. And I think it was all those years of experience in managing, large customers, lots of different cultures, negotiating. It just was a really easy transition, and I love it.
That's so great to hear.
So that's kind of my story.
Do you guys have questions for Jan about that journey?
Yes. Hi. Good
Hi,
afternoon.
Bruce. How are you?
Good. Hey, Jan, inspiring. So what would you say was the most useful transferable skill out of all your bag of tricks?
Honestly, I'm going to say it's problem solving, because real estate, the fun part is, meeting new people, getting to see houses, but you have no idea how many problems can crop up in a transaction. And you just have to be able to look at things matter-of-factly and kind of work through in your head what are potential solutions to this problem without getting emotional about it. And so that's probably been the biggest one. And then the other, I think, is just dealing with all kinds of people at all levels, regardless where they're from, regardless of what their age is. Probably those two things.
Yeah. All about the people, then the process, right?
Right.
Good. Well, good to meet you. Thanks.
Thanks.
All right. So I don't think Dannah has joined yet. So we will just move right along over to your strengths here. So I'm going to click on your profile. So when I heard you speaking, Jan, I really heard the individualization coming out, which is the strength that loves different customers. It loves different cultures, and it loves to interact with those one-on-one in a meaningful way that is good for the other person. And it makes the interaction work for the other person by really understanding what motivates them, their psychology, how they communicate, how they're wired, what they prefer. And, I think that this had to come into play to help you be really, really successful at both Sabre and your current job. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And I think it is really important with each client. You just can't treat them all the same way or approach all of them the same way, because you're dealing with people might be a first-time home buyer, that's excited but scared. It could be somebody that has, bought and sold, 10 or 15 properties over the years. And so you do have to look at each one, and that's the way I approach it. It's not a cookie cutter approach. It's trying to get inside the head of any given client as you're working with them.
One of the other things I heard was, I thought maybe you were going to say something along the lines of like, it's been a chore to learn how to influence, these various people in, because I'm very familiar with the game of real estate. My brother runs a real estate team in Nebraska. And so there's just a lot of corralling the cats and getting the lenders to do what you want them to do, and getting the, the buyers and sellers to do what you need them to do, and, so on and so forth. But you didn't say that. And I wonder if it's because you have such a strong set of influence among your activator and command naturally. Do you feel like influence is coming naturally to you, or do you feel like you have to work at it?
No, I think it does come very naturally. It's and you're right, it is a lot about herding cats. And there's the customer or the client on one hand, but there are all the other players. And I have honestly high expectations of my counterparts, whether it be a lender or a title company or, whatever it is. And I don't know, I just don't, while I run into challenges, I just kind of have a way of marshaling through it. And I go back to something that some of the executives said to me when I was at Sabre. I had a reputation. You know how sometimes you have a reputation, you don't even know what it is. But I had a reputation for, if you need something done, just give it to her and it'll get done. It's, and they would give me, like a department and say, go reorganize this. Or I think one of the first ones I remember was one of my clients handled military. It was a company called Sato, and they handled a lot of the military branches. And I got a call one day that they needed a system set up on a dock in Australia to handle sailors coming off the ship. And nobody had ever done that before. And we had a short timeline. And I didn't even blink. I just went and figured out who to call and pushed all the right buttons, and we got it done. Mm-hmm. So I think I've just kind of taken that same thing from there and transitioned it over here.
Yeah. And when I look at your strengths, I go, okay, somebody with command is obviously going to be just fine being in charge and directing traffic and putting the fist down if need be. But the activator is the one that's also really good in either, brand new scenarios where you just need to activate a lot of stuff, right? Get everything going. Or in a turnaround situation where things are bogged down and you just are like, need to go in there and break it all up. Especially command too can come in and break it all up into pieces, right? And then just reactivate everything. So what, I don't know if you know this, but and I'm going to click on a section of the tool called the unique brand here. Relator and command are extreme opposites. And they're only found together in a person's top 5 strengths 3% of the time. It's very unusual to have both of those two strengths together in a person's top 5. So, then I get really curious about, okay, if you're a relator and you love these, deep one-on-one relationships that you're building over time, but yet you have this really strong part of your personality that's commanding, and it's good with negotiations. And if somebody's getting hurt, you're going to just flare up and protect them. It's the harder part of the personality. I get really interested in how those are working together for you personally.
So I'm not a real outgoing life of the party kind of a person. I do far better one-on-one. and I can build a relationship with people. So I think that's where the relator comes in.
Yeah.
So my way generally of getting things done is to try to find some connection or some way to relate to the person that I'm trying to influence. So I used to say, just leave me alone and I'll get it done. I'm going to try to do it the soft way first, through building that relationship and trying to do that. But make no mistake, if I have to take out the sledgehammer to get it done, because there's no other way to do it, I'm capable of doing that. So I think that's where those two things come together.
Yeah. And you guys can hear, she said, one-on-one is a huge preference, which is the relator and individualization. But the sledgehammer comes out later. And I think that really demonstrates the order of the strengths as well. Because if command would be at the top, it might be, let's have the conflict first and then build the relationship. But because you have relator and individualization up top here, building the relationships is massively important first. But if you have to come in and sledgehammer something, you will. It looks like Dannah, have you arrived? Did we finally get you here?
I am here.
Yay!
Sorry for my late arrival.
That's okay. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone on the call so we can get to know you as well? You can tell us, what you thought you were going to do when you first started your life, the path that you took, and where you are today.
So my name is Dannah Mayo. I'm a director of sales currently for 340 Basics, which is a TPA that services the 340B federal program and the covered entities. Where I would start my where my career was going to go was education is where I originally thought that I was headed. It was just a little bit of time realizing that was not the path for me, and through a course of different things, ended up in sales and marketing, which I absolutely love, and is a fit for me in a lot of ways that I would never have recognized had I not ended up there.
So where are you right now? It looks like you're in a cube.
I am, well, currently right now I'm in the airport. I'm flying into Philadelphia to our headquarters office. So.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Forgive me if you guys are getting feedback.
We're not. It actually sounds great. I appreciate you joining, even though you're right in the middle of a flight. It's really great.
No problem.
So, yeah, and just so you guys know, I met Jan at Sabre, and then I met Dannah during a coaching initiative with a company, and we've all stayed in touch ever since. Does you guys have any questions for Dannah out the gate? I can pull her strengths up as well, so you can see her strengths, and you'll see how they are sort of the same and sort of different than Jan's. So although they have some things in common, Dannah gets a little bit heavier on the green side. So Dannah, maybe you can share with us a little bit of how your individualization and command have really come into play throughout the course of your career.
I 100% agree with what Jan was saying earlier. You try and take the softer approach, but if that's not working, the sledgehammer definitely comes out. With the individualization, it's not so much that, for me anyway, that I prefer one-on-one. I do have a pretty outgoing personality, but I do like to understand each person as an individual, what motivates them, what are they interested in, and get to know that person as an individual rather than part of the collective. I think that's, that relationship building. I think it's one of the only that I have in the top 10, but it being the first, it definitely drives, all of the others, and allows me to, be able to apply a softer approach, because most of my strengths are a little bit more demanding, a little bit harder, if you will.
Mm-hmm. So have either of you had, I guess, any trouble or learning curve with the command, I imagine the individualization has worked really well for you most of your lives. What about the command? Has that been trickier to navigate?
100%. Since when you don't shy away from conflict or anything that may be seen as conflict, that can be really off-putting to a lot of people. So leaning into some of those softer is incredibly important, so that you're not coming across as in a very negative way. And I've definitely seen that in relationships with coworkers, clients. You have to be very, very mindful of it, and very, very mindful of that coming across, and really how it's being interpreted by other people.
What about you, Jan?
So interestingly for me, the command in a business environment comes a little bit easier to me than it does in a personal situation. But I have always had kind of a unique ability to say things that if somebody else said it, it would probably sound offensive. I don't know why I'm able to do that, because I've had, in fact, the senior vice president, Brandy, and I both worked with, said to me one day, I don't know how you do that. You say things that should sound offensive and they just don't. So it's just always kind of come naturally.
Is it because you're taking a very just logical approach with the analytical and just sort of, not making it emotional, but rather logical?
I think so, because there's no, it's like people that know me certainly would know there was no malice in it, but it is what it is, and here it is. And it just, I don't know, it just seems to work for some reason.
And if we flip it, if we say, okay, when or how has the command really been effective for you? And I ask this because a lot of people ask this, right? They're like, my command always gets me in trouble. So how has it been useful for you in your career?
I guess maybe one of my best examples for that is, but we had a very difficult situation where an entire US based operation that I managed was going to be moved offshore. And so that was something that required a whole lot of dealing with people whose lives were going to be impacted, but you had to marshal through it. And so you just kind of had to take command of the situation and lay it out, and did it in such a way that there wasn't a lot of drama. There wasn't a lot of, angst around it, because I just went at it in such a way that we've got a plan in place to try to, save as many people as want to be saved. And I even took that back to senior management because I didn't like the way they wanted me to do it. And so I went back and said, I don't think this works. I think there's a much better way to do this. And so I was allowed to go down that path. So we phased the whole project. And I was able to save most of the people in the group. So I think that's probably one example.
How big was that endeavor? How many lives were being impacted?
It was about 100, I think.
So it has been my experience that people with command tend to shine in arenas that have a large amount of people that need to be directed. And, some sort of project, right, that involves a lot of people. Dannah, what about you? Do you have any sort of shining moments with command?
I can't think of a particular instance. There's several. However, I do think even in what Jan was talking about, it does allow you to take control of situations and not just navigate, but lead your group in, any situation where you have maybe people shying away from what do we want to do, or which way are we going, or, anytime there's kind of that type of confusion, it's very, very easy for me to slip in and say, okay, I have a path. Here we go. Let's go forward. This is what it is.
Mhm.
And that's been incredibly, incredibly useful for me, especially leading teams and joining organizations where, you know, you're kind of building the strategy of flying the plane as you're building it, as it were, to be able to jump in. And also, I feel like it has really benefited me in not shying away from hard conversations.
Yeah.
I see that happen a lot in organizations, and in people's personal lives as well. But the command strength in me dictates that, you know, we're going to solve the problem, and we're going to solve it today, and we're going to move into tomorrow, you know, with that behind us. So being able to step in and lead where it's needed, I feel like it cuts down on confusion for people. They feel more comfortable and able to do what they need to do when they feel like there's somebody there that at least knows which direction you're going.
Mhm.
I do think what we were saying earlier, tone is incredibly important when you have command is a very high strength. Jan, and just listening to your voice, you know, you have a really calm, kind of soothing tone about you. And I would imagine that has been really, really helpful for you. It's something that it's taken a little work for me because I have such a let's get going and gregarious personality.
So what about having command with analytical? You know, how does that change that? Because, you know, command with individualization, we've been talking about, adds the softer touch to the command. But what about analytical? I would think that hardens it a bit with the who, what, where, when, why, how, you know, thinking and questioning.
100%. You have to be careful that when you are questioning, and this is just something that I've certainly learned over the last 5 years, when you are going with the who, what, where, why, that you're posing those as questions and not so much questioning the person themselves.
Yeah.
Incredibly important, because when you combine that analytical strength with the commands, it can make people feel very defensive, as if you are questioning them, questioning their work, questioning their dedication, when that isn't the case at all. So again, it goes to tone and how you're phrasing things. You do have to be really, really mindful. I think that we all should, but you know, when you have a very hard strength like that, two of them combined, you know, you have to be mindful to soften it.
Yeah.
And how it's coming across and how it's being perceived. Because if it's being perceived incorrectly, often it's probably not being taken or accepted or understood.
Yeah, and it just might not be taken the way you mean it.
Right.
You know?
100%.
Yeah. What about you, Jan? Any thoughts on that analytical?
Not really. It kind of goes back to what we said with my kind of approach. It is factual.
Yeah.
And so the analytical piece of it is, you know, how did you arrive at those facts? Right. So I don't feel like it hardens it up at all, or maybe I'm just lucky, like I said, about the ability to kind of get that stuff out there without coming across as though I'm carrying the sledgehammer behind my back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think also you guys have certain perceptions of yourselves. And Jan, you know, with your relator and individualization, your intent is so good and you care about people so much, you may not even realize how strong you come across, you know, because, you know,
that is very true. That's a very true statement, because I have had people say to me, you intimidate me. And I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Because, you know, I don't get it.
Yeah. And I remember working with you in those good old days with Balaji, running numbers on spreadsheets. And, you know, I remember that you had a lot of patience until you didn't.
That would describe me well, I think.
You know, then when you'd had enough, right, of somebody pushing you too far, you just set that foot down, and it wasn't mean ever, but it was firm. you know, and it was enough to go, oh, okay, you can only push Jan so far, and then she's going to put her foot down. But I think personally that boundary was good, right? I mean, I don't think that you should let people run all over you all the time. I think you should try to work with them as much as possible. But if you need to put your foot down, put your foot down. But I could see how some people might be really intimidated, you know, by even just your ability to do that, even if you're not flexing it all the time.
Yep, that sounds exactly right.
So what's the activator like in there? What is it? What is its function?
So take immediate action, make things happen. I think it's from a patient standpoint, probably one of the things that frustrates me the most is if I decide to sit back and let somebody else lead and they don't.
Yeah.
That frustrates me.
Mhm.
So I like to make things happen. I don't like to sit and languish, and analysis to paralysis drives me insane.
Which
So I
is
think
great
where
when
the
you have
activator-
analytical, because
Right.
analytical can get into analysis paralysis. So it's
Right.
fantastic that you have this offset of activator in there.
So I don't suffer fools gladly. Don't have a tremendous amount of patience with inactivity, I guess, inaction.
So what happens, like, let's take your real estate business, for example. You probably have some clients that move fast, which is amazing, but then you probably have some clients that move like molasses. So do you just kind of like get rid of those clients eventually, or do you figure out a way to work with them, or do you figure out a way to just influence and get movement going with those clients, or do you feel like spending time on them is a waste of energy? What's your approach?
You know, interestingly, my approach with them is everybody, it's one of the biggest decisions of your life, purchasing a house, right? So I don't have strong feelings about everybody needs to go fast. You know, it's if I've got somebody that's slower, when I have somebody that says to me, I'm really not in a hurry, I'm not inclined to push them. I work with them at their pace.
Mhm.
Now, you know, can you influence some of that by, probably my best example of that was I had a California buyer. He was retired. His wife wasn't. He wanted to move here because they had children here, but he told me that they wouldn't be ready for probably 18 months. So you could easily just flush them away, say, I'm not going to fool with this. You're not going to want to spend a tremendous amount of energy, you know, because it takes away from other people. But I just decided to take kind of a nurturing approach, and I learned what it was that he was really going to want when he got here. And I would just touch him every, you know, kind of so often.
Mhm.
And a house came up that I thought, oh, gee, I think this is exactly what they're looking for.
Mhm.
So I just sent it to them and said, you know, no pressure, just sending this. I like to get feedback so that I can learn what it is that you really want when you get here. And lo and behold, his wife looked at that house and said, I want that house. And they flew in and they bought it and we closed in 30 days. So it's not a push, it's having patience and just kind of trying to work it over time.
See here. I'm going to take a breath here for a minute. Does anybody else have questions? Because you know me, I can keep going asking lots of questions here. So I want to make sure everybody has the ability to ask questions. Anybody?
Mute. Oh, there we go. True to form, Brandy, you do great question asking. So maybe a comment. I don't know if the others, I have analytical, as you know, and
Individualization. Yep.
Yeah. And my yang is analytical and strategy. So I don't know about the others, but what happens to me is I get this like high pitched, almost like internal chatter in my head when I get stuck between the talents. So I don't know if other people feel that or sense that. And if they do, you know, what do they do? I know what I do these days, but I'm curious to hear if the ladies have that same thing where they get this intense kind of voice in their brain, like messing with their decision making.
100% analysis paralysis. It's almost like an internal driving force that you can feel pushing you to the next thing, and this urgency that you need to, move out of the strategic or overthinking. And the best way I can think to categorize it, it almost feels like fear. It's almost this constant fear of not getting to the next thing or getting through your to-do list.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly think that has been an incredible tool for me. It has allowed me to push through and keep going where I've seen others really get stuck. And sometimes I can't really get stuck between the analytical and the strategic, and know there needs to be more planning, and there's more detail here and there's more color here. But that push and that drive, that kind of very loud voice that's saying, no, you're stuck, you go, allows me to go forward and say, I can always come back to this. There are things that you can leave out there, but let's go to the next step. But again, I think that it's been incredibly valuable to me because it has allowed me to keep going and keep climbing, that mountain, that hill, and to the ultimate result or goal, where others would get very stuck. So
yeah,
I think it's a real strength. It's a tool that's been really useful for me. But I certainly have it, that very loud voice.
Bruce, is your responsibility high?
Not so much. It's I have communications in place of the responsibility, Brandy. So mine are strategy, individualization, ideation, analytical, and communication. So I'm all over the map, and share strategy with Brad. I always know that. Hi, Brad. So I don't know if this helps, but that high-pitched voice, I give it a name. I call him Chipmunk Charlie because he's like, And I don't know if that helps with any visualization or individualization of how to deal with that. And then I find that these days, if I take a walk, it's funny, if I take a walk and before I take a walk, take a look at my vision board, which is where all my strategic things are. I don't know if that helps. What tools do you do when you get stuck in that high pitch, like that crazy voice in your head that's so strong? What do the other people do?
It's interesting that you said walk. My fallback tends to be breathing exercises or yoga. Take the walk with the dog, kind of to bring you back to center almost in a way. Quiet that little voice so that you can focus and move forward.
Yeah, he's not a little voice, unfortunately.
I need to name mine. I like that.
Yeah, actually, when you do, and then on the flip side of that, my positive voice is Alexander. So Alexander's a guy I know through IndyCar racing. So I have to, I guess when I walk, I talk more with Alexander, and Chipmunk Charlie just stops.
So when you guys have these things going on, usually it's just an overactive part of the brain that you have. And in fact, the one that you're specifying right now is a specific part of the brain. I'll send you a page on it after the call.
Okay.
Sometimes exercise or different nutrition or taking a walk actually fixes it because you're producing the hormones that will counteract the overactivity in the brain. So if anybody on the call ever has anything like that going on, where you're getting this constant reel of something going on in your head, it's just most likely because you have an overactive part of your brain that you need to nourish with nutrients and good hormones in order to calm it down.
Okay. So you're saying walking.
Well, I'll look up the exact part of the brain. I think that is, there are, if we could go into a whole nother discussion here around there are what, 14, 15 types of depressions, and different depressions are happening because of different over or under activity in different parts of the brain. So it's really hard to say, oh, I have this, slap this on it. It's more important to use this individualization strength really to really get into what is it that could be happening, which symptoms do you have? Do you have these or these or these or these? Because that's indicative of what part of the brain is actually causing the reeling that's going on. And then, you know, there's lots of ways to cure that, which can be, again, through therapy, through nutrition, through exercise, or even medication if it's really bad. But that's all that means if anybody gets that on. We all have little bits of it in different areas. Like mine probably is closer to the OCD kind of thing. You know, and then other people's might be, you know, more narcissistic, or maybe they're high risk taker, right? Their frontal lobes aren't working like they should be. So usually it's just, I just want y'all to know that it's usually more physical, and it's something that's actually going on in your body with your hormones and your brain. It's not a choice, right? We're not choosing to be crazy.
You know, I was feeling pretty good till this section. I know I got
You mentioned, Brandy, responsibility, and I believe that's one of my higher strengths as well. And I do feel like that particular strength feeds to that a lot. There's a strong feeling that there are people that are depending on me, and that, you know, I don't have time to be stuck. I don't have time to, you know, I sense that a lot. That strong sense of responsibility for my team, for the people that are depending on me. So it's a driver for sure.
Mm-hmm. You know, Jan, I just noticed that you also have deliberative at 6, which is the slowest decision-making strength, where activator is the fastest one. So now it makes sense why you have more tolerance for both sets of people, because, you know, if you're making a huge decision, you're going to stop, wait, hold up, put the brakes on, you know, do the analysis to make sure you're making a really good decision. And only then will you just activate and go and be willing to take action immediately. So you have a balance there, which is really nice between those two strengths.
I think I need to buy some of that.
Buy some balance.
No, buy that slowing down sometimes. I
wonder if
sometimes I react way too quick.
Okay. Do you have activator quite high, Bruce?
I don't remember, Brandy.
Right.
I only focus on my top 5 because, you know, it's the old cherry, right? If you can exercise your top 5 every day, then you're going to enjoy your day. And if you only exercise 1 out of 5, your day's probably not going to be super cool. So I try and focus on making sure I'm in my 5 talent zone as much as I can every day. So
I feel like everybody's threshold of what they use and don't use is different because of the intensifications that occur between certain strengths. So for example, relator and individualization intensify one another because they're both focused on one-on-one interactions. So when someone has both, they're really, really, really good at one-on-one interactions. Same with analytical deliberative. These are pairing strengths. You know, if you have one and then the other, then they intensify one another and they become, it's almost like you can't help but use both of them when you have them so close together like this. So different people's thresholds are actually different. You know, somebody's threshold might be between 6 or 7. Another person's might be, you know, between 9 and 10, like how many strengths they use above it. But it really just depends on how those pairings are coming out.
yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes you'll see, like for me, you guys will see that I have all these purple on top. So I use all the purple. You know, I come all the way down into 12, 13, and maybe even 14, I would say. I don't feel 15 and 16 and 17. In fact, I didn't even know I had significance. And I feel command sometimes. But I definitely feel I can see where my competition is in my life, but I also know it's nowhere near what competitive people feel. I definitely feel pretty confident with the self-assurance. But then the communication is somewhat strong. Like I really care about communicating something well to other people. But I also think that comes out through the learner. So, you know, my thresholds may be a little different than yours of top 5. Mine could be almost top 11, 12.
So funny little story, Brandy, you'll relate to this. I saw the ladies at Texas Motor Speedway and they said, "Where's Brandy?"
Aww.
I didn't need to use, but I used your technique to get access to that place. But as it turned out, the spot I'd reserved the ticket in was actually a better spot. So anyway, so just want to let you know that was a shared common experience where
Great.
you and I worked our talents pretty well together that day. So,
Yeah.
so for the rest of the people, Brandy figured out how to negotiate to get us into a no-go zone at Texas Motor Speedway last year. She did it so well.
And I don't even have any influence and natural influence in my top 10.
Right, but you used all the other purple stuff. So she figured out where the ladies were coming from. So
do you ladies have questions for each other here at all? Since you have one another? Or does anybody else have questions for these ladies? What do you guys see on the screen that's interesting to you?
Could you put the 2 upside down triangles side by side?
No, I
Brandy?
cannot. Sorry.
Okay.
So the discipline and focus are interesting in Dannah because that is an undertone of operational type strengths. She also has significance really, really high.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting how all the colors are almost like reflective in a different manner.
Yeah, they both have like a bunch of different colors through their top 10, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. But there's almost an equal share as well if you count them, right? Or did I count them?
And then we've got context low for both of them. But that's usually opposite of futuristic, and neither one of them had futuristic super high.
Could you go back?
Sorry? I can't tell if we're here in airport background or if someone's asking a question.
This is Eloise, and I was just going to say the only one that I have in common out of the top 10, 20 is empathy with Jan. That's my number 5, and that's not her number 10. I have no idea, you know, with all of the rest of them.
But you have all the ones down here, right? You have communication.
Yeah, communication, positivity, woo. Yeah. So what are not their strengths or mine? So we should work together.
Yeah, if you can, right? If you can
Really
get along.
Yeah.
Great cross-functional team.
Now, luckily with Jan and Dannah's individualization, they would probably find a way to work with you very well.
Oh, I do have activator. Activator.
Yeah.
So Jan and I have 2 together. None with Dannah. Sorry, Dannah.
It's okay. I do think that individualization strength, though, does make, and maybe Jan's felt this too, it has given me the ability to work with pretty much anyone. It's the first thing that I seek to do when I meet anybody new on a team or anybody that I'm really going to be working with, fine or otherwise, is to get to know them personally so that I can understand, you know, how to work with them. I think that's been
because you have the relator. Useful. You have the relator, the one-on-one kind of thing. Doesn't that help that, Brandy?
Does it help? Does it help what, Eloise?
Working with different types of people, doesn't the relator help with that or no?
Relators actually work better with people they can relate with. So relators work well with people that are like them. So if you look at mine, you'll see that I work really well with other learners, other achievers, people with consistency, discipline. And it's funny because some of my best friends that I hang out with, two of my best friends, they're a married couple who run martial arts studios, and they they have all of these strengths. You know, they're just very almost rigid in the way they run their lives. They're very high executionists. They're strong learners, and I just relate with those types of people. And so those are easy for me to just have relationships with those type of people, and it's easy for me to just relax around them and be myself around them. Where it's a lot more work for me to figure out how to relate in some way to people with all these other strengths. Where with these ladies, they have individualization, which actually thrives on meeting somebody that's different or unique and is from a different culture and is from around the world or has different strengths. Like, they really embrace the uniqueness of an individual and what that means.
Doesn't my woo kind of do the same thing in some ways, winning others over?
Well, your woo is focused on winning them over to you, winning them over to your cause, winning them over to what you're selling, winning them over to the products or services, or winning them over to like you. Where individualization isn't trying to win somebody over. It's trying to understand their psychology and their motivations and their preferences, so that they can then change their language and behavior within an interaction right there dynamically to make it work for that other person.
Maybe it's my connectedness then.
That's more like individualization. That's correct.
Yeah, where I can jump in and meet somebody and connect with them.
Connect. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's
okay.
right. Mm-hmm.
Hey, Brandy,
Yes, Brad.
quick question. As I'm looking at their charts, both of them have strategic kind of in the middle zones.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything in their top 5 or top 10 that counterbalances?
Yeah.
that?
So that you're talking big picture,
Yeah.
that's command.
Oh, that's command. Okay.
Command's got big picture. Mm-hmm. Would you
Okay.
ladies agree with that you're equally strong on the big picture and the details?
I would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Sounds-
100%. I think command, you were focused on the result, where it ends up, the big picture. I think I'm probably better with the big picture sometimes even than the details.
Yeah.
Because people that did a strategy, it used to frustrate me when somebody would come up with this great strategy, or so they thought, but they didn't think it through enough to know whether or not it would actually work. So I think that's where that balance comes. For me, I look at the big picture, but think through it to say, I used to kind of have a saying that says, that sounds good on paper. Now you go try to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. And so Brad, this is the graph that I use where I can see that the command is going to be setting the direction and sees the big picture and what needs to get done. And then the analytical is that really detailed, high quality assurance, evaluative strength here.
So it's interesting that Jan threw that out there, because I've got a different approach that if I could put it on paper, I can make it work.
And one sheet of paper as well is better for you.
For,
Right, Brad?
for me,
It is, yeah.
I like finding the way to make what's on the paper work. It's not that it's a bad strategy. You may have to tweak some things. How can you tweak this? How can you make this plan that maybe wasn't as thought through, but you can innovate it and push it forward.
And I'm hearing the deliberative in you, Jan, where you want it really well thought through. Those words, thought through, is usually that deliberative decision-making strength. Where Dannah, you just said, oh, we can come up with it and kind of wing it a little bit more. Because you don't have that deliberative that puts the brakes on and says, now, how realistic is this really to make this happen? I mean, you both are analyzing, right? You're asking the who, what, where, when, why, how. but I think it was very subtle. You could almost hear that deliberative coming in, which is because I'm high deliberative. So I can hear it because I'm going, I want a good plan. I mean, I want everything thought about in every way to make sure, because I'm a low risk taker, in order to take this risk, it's really going to have to look good.
And it's not that you want them to tell you how to do it, but you want them to be realistic. Because I mean, I've had a couple of plans handed to me that I looked at them and said, you're kidding me, right?
Right.
I mean, so if the things are within your control, maybe, and you can just be able to come back, I guess, with, if here is your end objective, then I think we can get partway there. Here's how we can do this, but the pie in the sky doesn't always work.
Mm-hmm.
Or we
So
never
it
claimed it all.
depends on the environment and the situation, certainly.
What'd you say, Brad?
So we never claimed it always works.
Good point, Brad.
But it,
All right. Any other questions for these two ladies that you've gotten to know a little bit today?
Where does Jan have positivity? Am I just missing it? Oh,
They're
hello.
both, yep, 22 and 33.
Hmm.
And that doesn't mean they're not happy people. As you can see, they're both very happy.
I'm not a rah-rah person, that's for sure. I'm a little bit too practical for that.
Yeah.
Right. But isn't that where the command thing kicks back in? Because it's almost, I mean,
Even the analytical, Bruce, and you
Right.
might not relate with that because your positivity is high. Usually positivity is very high with communication and woo. But
Yeah.
and you've got analytical on top of that, but these two ladies have analytical without that positivity, communication, woo. Yeah.
so
okay.
what number is skeptical? Is skeptical
That's
42?
analytical.
Come on, Brad.
Is that 35? Did we just create a new one?
Yeah, Brad. Good job, Brad.
Is there anything else you ladies would like to add to today's conversation before we wrap it up?
Probably the only thing is I never really, from the time I did this exercise, I was very interested in the results when we first did it, but I had almost forgotten all about it. So it's kind of a nice opportunity to revisit these and think about them, because when I did this, I was in a corporate environment.
Yeah.
So it's a good opportunity to revisit them in my new environment, just to think about them.
Yeah. And as an entrepreneur, it's really good to look through, what do I need to outsource? What are my strengths and what do I need to focus on? But what am I not thinking about at all that maybe I need to somehow incorporate in my business, or, partner with other people to make sure that I'm not missing out on that. So I find it's really helpful for entrepreneurs, people that run their own businesses, small businesses with leadership teams, any of those types of entities to really understand what is working for you, but also what the gaps are.
Yeah. Great point.
Okay, well, I guess we're gonna let Dannah get on her flight. And
Thank you guys so much. I hope you have a great rest of your week.
you too.
Yeah.
And thank you ladies for joining. It was
Thank
wonderful
you.
having you today.
Thank you, Brandy.
Bye.
You're so welcome,
Thank y'all.
Jan. Thank you.
Good facilitation, Brandy.
Thank you,
Amazing.
Bruce. Thanks
right.
for coming.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
wonderful as always.
Thank you, Eloise.
Bye.